Welcome to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. Join us as we dive into the critical conversations shaping the future of coal. From industry experts to policymakers, we're exploring coal's essential role in America's energy, economy, and global trade. Whether it's powering communities, driving innovation, or securing strong global economies, coal is at the heart of it all. ACC, proud to be American, proud to be coal. Coal Nation starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. I'm your host, Christian Palich with Eagle Summit Resources. Today, we're honored to be joined by James Danley, Deputy Secretary of Energy. James Danley brings deep experience in energy policy and electric reliability, having previously served at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as General Counsel, Commissioner, and Chairman. In this episode, we discuss the Department of Energy's work to support America's coal industry, strengthen baseload power, protect the electric grid, and recognize the continued importance of both thermal and metallurgical coal. We are so excited to have the Deputy Secretary with us today. Welcome, Deputy Secretary. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. We're excited to talk coal with you, and there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to dive right in because you guys are working at warp speed over at the Department of Energy to support the coal industry and America's energy grid. So number one, I want to start, we're recording this here in July, and recently there's been a ton of announcements supporting America's coal industry coming out of the Department of Energy. So if you could, I'm going to give you the floor to kick this off. Talk about all the great things and these recent announcements we've seen that are supporting the president's energy agenda and that Coal Nation be interested in hearing about.
Sure. So the first thing probably to say is that President Trump has ended the war on coal. For years and years, we've seen policies that have done everything they can to inhibit coal as a resource. And in fact, between various market designs and various regulations and regulatory burdens, it was clear that there was an agenda and an attempt to get rid of as much of the coal as possible. We need the coal generators for the electric system. We simply need them. And in fact, it's worth noting that coal was the bulk of the generation fleet, the fundamental component of it for years. And our transmission system was originally developed around the idea of having a large number of coal generators that would be the baseload power. The real issue is that President Trump entered office at a time when we had had all of these burdens I talked about on the coal fleet, just at the time that electricity demand began surging. And so we're at a time of rapid increase in electric demand and a time in which many of the coal plants were making completely rational economic decisions from their standpoint, but they were being burdened by unnecessary regulation that made it almost impossible to remain commercially viable. So the Department of Energy stepped in several ways to stop the loss of these generators. And in fact, this is part of a broader purpose that we have, which is to retain all the generation we can on the bulk power system and in fact add as much more as possible as quickly as we can. So the first thing we did was we announced an $850 million set of projects in order to both modernize and recommission coal plants that had either required upgrades or were going to be mothballed or retired. And that's resulted in preserving somewhere around 40 gigawatts worth of generation. I don't know, 30, 40, 50 coal plants, I don't remember the exact number, were recipients of this money. The second thing we did was we issued a series of emergency orders that required certain coal plants to remain in operation. This is despite the fact that they had planned in going into retirement. Those set of orders insisted that they remain as viable resources to continue running. So they had fuel on site, they kept their operations going, and were dispatched in the normal course of business as least cost generators when there were times of system constraints. It's worth noting that those generators, by and large, have operated during the two really bad periods of strain that the bulk power system has had over the last year. One, Winter Storm Fern, two, the emergency order plants ran, and just now over this 4th of July weekend, when we had the constraints in PJM, we had emergency order plants running too. Those orders gave a signal to the market that we were serious about keeping coal plants. And so far more of the coal plants that were planning on retiring voluntarily withdrew their retirements because they knew that there was a new plan by the government that this administration was not going to let useful, valuable assets that could contribute to the bulk power system lapse into retirement when they are desperately needed to keep the bulk power system running. And they're needed not just for the requirement of the power demand to meet the demand that's increasing, they're also needed in order to keep the transmission system running, right? These are fundamental baseload assets that are required to operate the transmission system, and they're not easily replaceable. One of the biggest problems we've had as a country is that when the president took office, we were looking at a neighborhood of somewhere around 100 gigawatts of planned retirements of primarily coal, but other baseload generation. And at the time, there was only plans to replace with about 100 gigawatts of planned retirements and about 20 gigawatts of planned replacement. There is no way you can run a transmission system and a utility system when you have that level of attrition of baseload power. And so all of these actions were taken in order to ensure that we have affordable, reliable, secure electricity for the American people and to keep the rates as low as possible going forward by ensuring we have adequate supply.
Yeah, well, that's terrific. And Deputy Secretary, I was at a conference a few years back when you were actually at FERC. Your background, you're at FERC as chairman over there. And I heard you saying these things from that perspective from FERC and now the Department of Energy, which you guys are doing. So you've long been someone that's talking about how important baseload power is, especially as you mentioned, two of those weather events that we're seeing right now, whether it's extreme cold as we saw in the winter, extreme heat, as you said, we saw last week during the 4th of July. So we know your expertise on it because I know personally I've been hearing you talk about it for years and I appreciate your guys' leadership on that. And you're talking about gigawatts, not megawatts, as you said. It's a large number. It's a very large number.
It's a very large number. And even more important than just the scale of it is that delta between 100 lost and 20 added, right? There's no way that you can have that. In fact, we had a reliability report that we issued shortly after the president's inauguration that highlighted this loss of power and the transmission constraints on the transmission system. We're talking about across the entire country, right? This is a large model where we expected there to be both constraints to get the power where it has to go and lack of power in the first place. And if that trend had continued, if we had allowed all of that baseload to have dropped off, the report that we issued suggested that there would be somewhere around a 100-fold increase in the total amount of load shed, right? And that is the sort of thing that a modern industrialized economy simply cannot function with, right? The sine qua non of modern industrial economies is that you have power at reasonable rates available 24/7. And we design our entire transmission system and our generation fleet to ensure that we have the correct mixture of generation assets so that we can ramp up production. We have peakers for times of extraordinary demand. We have baseload to be continuously available, and we have transmission that is both resilient and redundant so that we can make sure that that power doesn't go off. That is hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure built in order to ensure that this fundamental commodity of electricity is available all the time to everybody. And it is impossible to imagine that the United States is going to be able to increase its industrial capacity and be able to have people live happy, flourishing lives if we don't solve a basic problem that we had solved for 100 years before that, which is making sure that when you turn the switch, the lights come on. That is fundamental to the objective here, is to meet that demand and make sure the system is resilient.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I'm sure you saw it too, Deputy Secretary Danley, when Wall Street Journal had the thank heaven for coal during that winter event that you so eloquently brought up earlier. And, had we continued down some of the policies we were seeing in the war on coal, you announced it's over. What would have happened to our electric grid and how strained would that have been? What you guys did, quite frankly, saved lives in those events. And it's really important what you guys are doing and keeping the rates affordable for people that can't afford, high rates of electricity going up. So it's admirable all the great things you guys are doing. And as we talk about all the plants you guys are keeping open and the recent announcements that you just spoke about and all those great things, we've heard a lot of talk recently too about new coal plants and not just, we're upgrading our current plants. We're looking at building new coal plants. So I want to give you a minute. How's DOE, what you guys are talking internally and what we're hearing coming out of the Department of Energy as a coal industry? How are you guys viewing possible new coal plants too to support all those things you guys are doing?
So I'm happy to get into the question about new coal build in a second, but I want to mention one more thing since you brought it up about the winter storm and constraints with coal filling that gap. So those gigawatts that we managed to save by directly issuing the emergency orders, plus all of the generators that decided not to retire immediately thereafter, it's critical to know exactly where the power comes from and how you design a utility system. And most people's eyes glaze over with this, but for this audience, I think it's worth getting into for a second, right? The utility system has to be designed, the entire thing, of course, to be resilient and of course to be a reasonable price for the electricity provided. But it is always designed for those handful of hours that see peak demand, right? One of the reasons why you want, all things being equal, you want to have as many of the baseload generators as you can get is because they are the ones that you know for a fact are dispatchable when you need them. And they have all manner of other operating characteristics that are necessary to run the electric system. So they provide volts, amperes, reactive, spinning reserves, inertia. And that is not the way the intermittent resources like wind and solar operate. These are based on inverters and they have common outage modes where once the sun sets, all of the solar ends. I often joke in podcasts like these that solar is the only resource category that's guaranteed one outage a day at minimum. Coal can run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when you have times of strain. When we had Winter Storm Fern, the combination of all fossil fuel generators plus nuclear ended up being about 86% of the total amount of generation produced. And so you have to appreciate the fact that in the absence of large chunks of that category that I just listed, you are not going to be able to meet the demand. And so if you have a system that depends upon intermittent resources, if at the same time the wind doesn't blow and the sun is not shining, so if you don't have the wind blowing at all during that 12 hours a day where there isn't sun, and you were relying upon that for your marginal megawatt, you were going to have load shed. Now, one of the things we did in addition to preserving the coal fleet that we already have through those emergency orders was we had a very novel approach to those emergency orders in another way that came into effect both in Winter Storm Fern and was not employed, but was there as a relief valve during the heat wave over 4th of July. We gave the balancing authorities the power under our orders to order the operation of backup gen. So these are the diesel backup generators that industrials have, or data centers, various different large load facilities when they require 24/7 power. And as you get into emergency constraints, you move further and further and further towards scarcity. Immediately before load shed would be undertaken in order to keep the system balanced, the balancing authorities could call upon those backup generators to run and then effectively curtail those industrials to make sure that the total strain on the system drops. The fact that we are in a place where we have to do that, and it was actually employed during Winter Storm Fern, is an indictment of the policies that we have been following for years, and is the reason why the president inaugurated, right after his inauguration, issued the executive order declaring an energy emergency. It is only because we have a system that lacks sufficient supply that such a thing would be required. And although it wasn't used during the July 4th heat wave, those emergency orders were issued by the department, and the balancing authority, PJM, was prepared to employ them, and they got right up to the brink of needing to, and then thankfully, before the end of the day, they didn't. So I just want to highlight exactly how important that category of generation is. It's fundamental. And certainly in the mid-Atlantic where we live, the amount of coal generation is absolutely huge, and we cannot function without it. So back to the subject of new build. Nothing would make me happier than to see as many of America's natural resources employed, both for our benefit and those of our friends and allies overseas. We have an absolutely vast amount of coal available. We should make use of it. And to the extent to which we can do things like the uprates and the refurbishments we've talked about, we absolutely should, because we have pre-existing facilities there. And it would be folly to engage in the billions of dollars of replacement cost if for a fraction of that, you could simply upgrade the fleet that exists to give it a longer lifespan and more useful years of function. It would also be great to see greenfield coal built. And if there is a commercial case to be made for it, the DOE would be completely behind such a thing. There is no reason not to. This is an absolutely rational asset that is employed every day in a lot of the balancing authorities across the United States. And there's no reason, if there's a commercial value to it, that it shouldn't be employed. The other thing to mention is that the DOE has any manner of vehicles to help with that, not just the coal money that we talked about before, the program to refurbish and enhance the existing fleet. But we have the loan book from the Energy Dominance Financing Office. And should there be somebody who wishes to explore financing with us, I wholeheartedly, enthusiastically suggest they come and discuss it. The hope is to employ as many of the natural resources that America is blessed with to ensure affordable, reliable, secure energy for the United States.
That's terrific. And you use some terms, Deputy Secretary, that as Americans, when we have all these resources, it's interesting to hear. So load shedding being one, we typically read that in other countries when they can't meet their peak energy demands and have to load shed. So that's number one. And then number two, you're talking about energy emergency. Well, a company like ours, we're mining 36 million tons of coal, have way more recoverable reserves out there, and we're not the only one. We have the fuel. It's interesting to hear you guys use those terms because you guys are truly trying to end that so those words don't come up as much. But unfortunately, in the past, there's been some bad policies that have led us down that way. So it can be tough to undo some of those. And you guys are working at warp speed to do it. It's really actually pretty impressive how much you guys have accomplished.
Utilities are things that take many years to plan and many more years to actually build the infrastructure for. These are not overnight things. And you end up paying for the sins of the past in the present when you don't have wise transmission build and wise decisions and deliberate choices made to ensure that you have sufficient supply. And so we're living in that now. And that's one of the reasons why the president has been laser focused, as Secretary Wright, on ensuring that we have enough supply to come online to meet this demand. And you have to understand, too, that the nature of the demand that's coming online is different from that which we had before. The United States has been through periods of rapid electrification. During the 60s, when we had a lot of industrial development, we had demand increase greatly off of the baseline. There was a really large increase in the total amount of electricity both produced and consumed. But when that happened, it was a much longer process in which you would say to your local utility, I need to have a connection for, I'm making this up, but a 200 megawatt manufacturing facility. And they would say, hey, that's great. We will have you interconnected and ready to go in 7 years. And your response is, well, that's great because we're going to be ready to go into operation in 8 years. Nowadays, we have facilities that are coming online in periods of time more conveniently measured in months. And when that happens, you need to be able to take advantage, at least in the interim, of the pre-existing generation fleet. We have to keep it operating. You have to build as much new generation as you can as you go along, and you have to improve the transmission system to accommodate that new power that's coming on. And these are multivariable equations that have to be solved, not just to accomplish the goal of getting the power there, but at the same time ensuring that normal, hardworking American families don't end up shouldering the burden for the development of that infrastructure. Along those lines, the president had the hyperscalers and data centers come into the White House to sign the Ratepayer Protection Pledge, which guaranteed that for all of those very large loads that come on quickly, they are going to bring with them to their transmission system more generation than they're going to consume during their peak demand times. That's going to put downward pressure on the rates that the American people have to pay and ensure that there's always going to be enough electricity available from dispatchable resources going forward. That is one of the key elements of this, is that not only do we have to build out to ensure reliability and resilience, but we have to build out in such a way that we ensure that ratepayers not pay the price for it. And in fact, for many of the efforts that the Department of Energy has undertaken, we have built into our programs that kind of ratepayer protection. So for example, we had a historic loan for tens of billions of dollars to Georgia and Alabama Power for transmission and generation build out. And as part of that, they agreed to a rate freeze for the electric consumers for the next couple of years. Those are really good news stories that both demonstrate that you can build out of the infrastructure without burdening hardworking Americans with higher utility costs, and you can rationally and deliberately develop the infrastructure needed.
Yeah, a real and important win as well.
An even bigger win, one of the counties where they built the infrastructure actually canceled, and I don't mean put a holiday, but they canceled the property taxes. You want to talk about government for the people. You can imagine how happy people were.
And that's great. I follow the news deputy secretary a lot. I read a lot. I read a lot about energy and coal. I didn't know that. That's new information. I don't know how many of our listeners today knew that, but this is why we have folks like you on the podcast, because that is incredible new information that all of us that advocate for affordable, reliable energy need to know, because that's important things that voters don't know about. A lot of people don't know that those kinds of things are happening. And it's all a result of what you guys are doing at the Department of Energy. I wanted to segue a little bit because you talked about exporting American energy. A lot's going on. Our CEO and I were lucky enough to attend the IPEM conference that the White House put on in Tokyo back in March. Undersecretary Housefit was there, had a great conversation with him, many of your DOE colleagues. And all we heard about is exports. People want coal. The growing demand for Asian coal, Europe needs coal, South America. DOE has their hand in a lot of this, and we're seeing it coming fast and fury with some of the things you guys are doing to support American coal exports. As a company that wants to do more of that, we already do some, but we want to do more, specifically even out of the West in Wyoming. What's DOE looking at with American coal exports to the folks across the globe that want our energy?
Well, first of all, you're quite right that the subject comes up constantly, and the demand for coal worldwide is huge. And part of the reason for that is just an extraordinarily reliable fuel source. You can pile it up, you have reserves right there on hand, you are able to manage inventory despite disruptions that may arise, and you're able to get a hold of it as a commodity that is traded universally and is universally available. That makes it an extremely appealing source of electricity for many, many countries. Second, the United States, you actually alluded to this earlier, is blessed with an absolutely extraordinary quantity of coal. And so it is a resource that we want to make available both to our own people for electric generation and also overseas. And so you asked what we're doing specifically. I mean, maybe the most important thing is the support for the West Gateway Terminal, which is in San Francisco. Well, I guess technically it's in Oakland. And that is a very large export facility that I think is set for 10 million tons of coal annually and will be a major export terminal, and is one of the ways that we want to ensure that there are markets for this commodity worldwide, not merely in the United States. It's also worth noting that it's not merely thermal coal, but it's also met coal that we want to be able to make available. The metallurgical coal is fundamental to any modern industrialized country because it's necessary for all manner of different processes, most notably steel. And we've been exporting met coal for years, but we want to see as much of it put in the hands of friends and allies as we can, both because it supports them and also because it re-strengthens the American energy exports.
Yeah, absolutely. Our company exports a lot of metallurgical coal to places across the globe. Besides wanting to do more thermal coal, as you mentioned, with the terminal and what you guys are doing with that, I mean, anything we can export is fantastic, not just the folks at our coal mines, but even the workers in the states where we all operate in. And I got to thank you, Deputy Secretary, and Secretary Wright as well, for all you guys do and your team. Huge shout out to the DOE team. We had them at our mines in Wyoming with a delegation from Malaysia. Assistant Secretary Cocodrelli was there at our mine with a group from Malaysia looking at exporting coal. What a terrific thing you guys are doing. You guys are out really pounding the pavement and being advocates for us. And it just means a lot.
Yeah, this is not an uncommon thing to engage broadly and widely with foreign countries that they're either trade representatives or delegations. That particular one you're talking about was a trip to Wyoming. And the objective was to basically show as much of the bounty as we could and the opportunities that were available for very significant exports at commercially viable terms. This is part of the president's entire energy agenda. We want to have peaceful relations with everybody we can, and we want to engage in mutually beneficial trade so that everybody is prosperous. And one of the main pillars of that is energy, because we here in America have so much of the basic natural resources that we can make it available and make everybody prosperous with it.
Yeah, that was a terrific tour, and it was so great to have all you and your team, the team out there. It was fantastic. So thanks for what you guys are doing. I mean, all these things we've talked about. So what's on the horizon? I don't want you to give anything up you can't talk about yet. Wouldn't want you to get ahead of anything, but is there anything with our Coal Nation audience that you could preview, Deputy Secretary, that's going to be coming out of DOE that maybe you could talk about, or some things you're working on high level that those of us in the energy and coal world can start to get really excited about, or possibly even be helpful to you guys in some of the things you're developing at the department?
So it's not directly relevant to coal exactly, but it certainly has to do with the same basic purpose of ensuring that we have sufficient baseload power. We met a critical milestone in the development of small modular reactors, which was we got 4 of these designs to criticality in the course of about 10 months by July 4th. The president set us a goal of doing 3 and we got to 4. So we actually exceeded the expectations. That's very exciting. And that promises, these are relatively small nuclear reactors, and so they don't replace the big gigawatt scale facilities. They're not a 1-for-1, but that is an exciting opportunity. We're still exploring more possibilities for ensuring that we are able to further strengthen the coal fleet and, in fact, all fossil fuel generation. We're working on storage possibilities. We're looking into as many of the critical minerals as we can solve the supply chain issues for. We basically want to ensure a superabundance of energy here in America, both for domestic consumption and export. And we want to ensure that America is insulated from as many of the supply chain disruptions across the board, especially in critical minerals, but across the board as we can, so that we're not potentially victim to, let's say, malign state actor intervention or supply chain disruptions. Those are a lot of the major efforts we have going on.
It's fantastic. With the One Big Beautiful Bill last year and metallurgical coal being listed as a critical mineral, as you talked about, it's so vital to global infrastructure and steel production. I mean, what you guys are doing to make sure that metallurgical and thermal coal are available to our allies and here in the domestic market. It's, like I said, it's absolutely invaluable, all the things you guys are doing.
Try building anything without steel, and try making steel without metallurgical coal. Go right ahead and give it a shot.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Well,
it's fundamental to modernity.
Great point, Deputy Secretary. I'm sure been in these meetings and heard India wants to triple their steel output, over the next 5 to 6 years. We want that to come from American metallurgical coal. It's the best in the world. We can export it. There's going to be a lot more discussions on these trade deals as we see as well. And you guys, the department, play a role in that as well. I'm sure being a part of it,
Absolutely.
those discussions.
Yes, of course. And the thing is, when it comes to, I didn't expect to be talking about met coal so much on this chat, but when it comes to metallurgical coal, the demand signals for that too are real. We have rapidly growing economies that require immense outputs. You talked about India, but it's not just India. Throughout the world that require this fundamental commodity, without which they are simply not going to achieve their ambitions of industrialization.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun to talk about. We have met coal. So when you brought it up earlier, I was like, I really want to go down that path a little bit for our audience, because a lot of people that listen to this are pure met coal operators too. So they'll be happy that we segued even a little bit more to that than the thermal side. But we really appreciate your time. It's been a terrific discussion. You and I could talk hours about the energy grid, but we know you're very busy doing all the great things you're doing at the department. But before we get out, I want people to get to know you a little bit better. This is a podcast. You're a very busy guy. I'm sure you travel a lot. You work very long hours. Washington's a very busy place. But what are some of the hobbies you like to do? What are some of the things that you do to unwind? Maybe listen to your Coal Nation podcast, hopefully after this. What do you like to do in your free time, Deputy Secretary, so we can all get to know you a little bit?
So I will admit to you that I do not have much free time in this job. And
I
it is
believe it.
basically when I am not working, I am eating and sleeping for the most part. I guess I do think about the Roman Empire several times a day, as many of us do, but I'm not, it's not like I'm part of some amateur wiffle ball league or something like that. I really don't do a lot. I suppose I read occasionally when I'm not too exhausted from reading at work, but that's about it. I spend time with my son. I mean, there's not much. I wish I had something
Yeah.
more exciting.
No. I mean, like I said, when you're not busy, you're busy, right? It's very challenging. It's hard if you're a golfer to get 4 hours to go play golf. So maybe it's good that that's not one of your hobbies. So.
Yeah, I'm not a golfer, mercifully. I don't have to balance that schedule requirement. The thing is, it is a privilege to have this job. The DOE has, between its employees and contractors, over 100,000 people working at it. We have an absolutely huge institution. We have three main mission sets. There's the energy policy we've talked about. There are the 17 national labs and all the fundamental science that they do. And then we have the NNSA, which does the nuclear weapons stockpile maintenance, design, and sorting. In between those, that's an awful lot. And the deputy is the chief operating officer. So there are quite a few duties to discharge in this role. So I'm honored to have it. It is a privilege to serve both the president and Secretary Wright. I have immense faith in the energy mission that the president and the secretary have set for us. And I really do think that we have accomplished a great deal just in the first year and a half. And we're creating momentum that is going to transform energy policy. We're going to leave legacies of having reversed bad policy and get the United States the supply of electricity in particular it needs, but also ensuring that the broader requirements of affordable, reliable, secure energy are achieved across the board.
Yeah, you said it spot on. And we really appreciate your time today. I mean, this has been incredibly informative. I feel like I was just in a class learning because I was just taking it all in and the terrific things you were talking about. Anything else for our Coal Nation audience, Deputy Secretary? I want you to have the last word here. Anything else you want to tell anybody that's listening about what you're doing?
You pay a nice compliment, and we didn't even get into the nuances of electric rate making for my time at FERC, which I will spare this audience. There's no need to get into it. I will not voice that on them.
So we want you back. That's part 2 someday.
Well,
yes.
By all means, I'm happy to do so, but it will come at the cost of occasional mentions of just and reasonable rates and so forth. But anyway, so you say the last word. Basically, what I want is for everybody to know that the Department of Energy is doing everything it can to advance the president's agenda to ensure that we have as much build out of this infrastructure as possible and to ensure that hardworking Americans are not going to be saddled with the cost of that development. The fact is, energy in all of its forms is fundamental to human life and human happiness, and it is the underpinning of every other part of the economy. We have a critical role that we're playing here, and we are going to continue just grinding away at it for as long as we can to ensure that we achieve those goals. And to the extent to which people want the help of the Department of Energy, they should reach out. We have a loan authority to underwrite projects. We are here to render technical assistance and help with various functions that people might want assistance with. We're here and we're doing as much as we can.
That's fantastic. Well, Deputy Secretary of Energy, James Danley, it's been an absolutely terrific conversation. Thank you so much for your time. We heard how busy you are. You don't have time to really have too much going on other than work right now. So to spend time with us in the Coal Nation audience and all of us in the industry, it means the world to us. Thank you so much for coming.
Let's call this my hobby for the day.
There you go. Podcast. I hope you had a little fun. I hope this is in your meeting schedule when you looked in the morning when your team handed it to you. You said, I get to do a podcast and talk coal.
Right.
Hopefully that was a highlight. So great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Deputy Secretary. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
That was Deputy Secretary of Energy, James Danley. What an important and insightful conversation for Coal Nation. We heard directly from the Department of Energy about coal's critical role in grid reliability, energy security, American industry, and global exports, including the growing importance of both thermal and metallurgical coal. A sincere thank you to Deputy Secretary Danley for joining us and sharing his insights with Coal Nation. Thank you to all of you for listening to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. I'm Christian Palich, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Coal Nation, the official podcast of the American Coal Council. Our mission is to share coal's story and showcase its critical role in powering our economy and supporting our way of life. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe. The American Coal Council represents members across the entire coal supply chain and advocates tirelessly for our vital industry. There is strength in numbers, and we'd love for you to be part of the conversation. By joining ACC, you gain exclusive access to the latest industry developments, a voice in our work that can benefit your business, and incredible networking opportunities. To learn more, visit www.americancoalcouncil.org. Together, we are shaping the future of coal, and it's exciting. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.